The morning of September 12th, 1683, carried with it a silence that was anything but ordinary. On the hills outside Vienna, a sight unfolded that would become etched forever in the annals of Europe. Thousands of armored men banners fluttering and the wind horses pawing at the earth, waiting for a signal that would change the destiny of nations. At the center of it all was a man whose very presence stirred courage in the hearts of his allies and fear in the ranks of his enemies, John III Sobieski, King of Poland. That morning was not merely the dawn of another battle. It was the hinge of history. For months, Vienna, the beating heart of Central Europe, had been under siege by the mighty Ottoman Empire. Its walls crumbled, its people starved, and the fall of the city seemed inevitable. Had Vienna been taken, the road to Europe lay wide open for Ottoman conquest, from the Danube to the Rhine. But then came a moment, a charge, and a roar that still echoes through the centuries. This is the story of how the King of Poland destroyed the Ottoman dream of domination, saved Europe from an Islamic conquest, and forged his name into legend at the Battle of Vienna. When we examine the Battle of Vienna, we must not only think of military maneuvers or sheer numbers. We must understand the civilizational weight this event carried. As historian Andrew Wheatcroft emphasizes in his book, The Enemy at the Gate, Habsburgs, Ottomans. In the battle for Europe, this clash was not a mere struggle over territory, it was a confrontation between two competing visions of world order. The Ottomans, under Grand Vizier Kara Mustafa, had marshaled nearly 150,000 men, one of the largest armies Europe had ever seen. Facing them, the defenders of Vienna counted barely 15,000 starving soldiers and civilians. The balance of power was so overwhelmingly tilted that Europe trembled at the thought of Ottoman victory. Yet, as history so often reminds us, numbers alone do not dictate outcomes. The arrival of John III Sobieski and his Polish hussars would tilt the scales in the most dramatic way imaginable. John III Sobieski was not just a king, he was a warrior, a strategist, and a man of deep Christian conviction. In Vienna 1683, Christian Europe's last great victory against Islam, historian Ludwig Heinrich Dyck portrays Sobieski as a figure larger than life, a monarch who understood that his crown meant not privilege, but duty. He led his men not from the safety of the rear, but from the very front lines, embodying the spirit of a crusader king. When Pope Innocent VI sent out a desperate plea for Christian princes to unite against the Ottoman menace, it was Sobieski who answered most decisively. Venimus vitimus, Deus visit, we came, we saw, God conquered, Sobieski would later write to the Pope after the battle, a phrase that forever captured the divine weight he felt his victory carried. The march of Sobieski's relief army across Europe was itself a feat of endurance and faith. With 40,000 men to Poles and 20,000 allies from the Holy Roman Empire, he traversed difficult terrain, scaling mountains and pushing through forests, determined to arrive before Vienna fell. Historian John Stoye, in The Siege of Vienna, notes how the sight of Sobieski's banners approaching the beleaguered city inspired a hope that had nearly been extinguished. For the Viennese, who had endured starvation, disease, and constant bombardment, the sight of the Polish king was like the arrival of salvation itself. On the day of battle, Sobieski prepared not only his strategy, but also his soul and the souls of his men. Before the clash, he ordered a solemn mass to be celebrated. He and his hussars prayed, knowing they were not merely fighting for territory, but for the survival of Christendom itself. The clash began with artillery and infantry engagements, as Christian forces sought to weaken the Ottoman positions. The Ottomans, confident after months of siege, were unprepared for the ferocity of the counterattack. Then came the moment that history would never forget. As the sun began to descend, Sobieski unleashed the largest cavalry charge in recorded history. Nearly 20,000 horsemen, led by the famed Polish Winged Hussars, thundered down the slopes of Kahlenberg Mountain. The sound was like rolling thunder, shaking the earth itself. Austrian eyewitnesses described the sight as both terrifying and magnificent men in shining armor, wings on their backs, charging with unstoppable force. The Ottoman lines, already stretched and weary, collapsed under the sheer weight of the assault. Kara Mustafa's once mighty army dissolved into chaos, fleeing in panic. Historian David Parrott describes in The Business of War how the psychological shock of that cavalry charge was unlike anything the Ottomans had ever experienced. The disciplined might of the Hussars, combined with Sobieski's perfect timing, broke not just the army, but the very morale of an empire that had seemed invincible. Vienna was saved, and with it, Europe. The Ottoman dream of marching deeper into the continent was shattered, never to be realized again. If you're fascinated by moments in history where a single decision, a single leader, or a single battle altered the fate of entire civilizations, then you're in the right place. On this channel, we bring you not just history, but the stories that define who we are today. So if you haven't already, make sure to subscribe, hit that notification bell, and join us as we uncover more epic tales like the Battle of Vienna. Trust me, you won't want to miss what's coming next. Now, let us return to Vienna, for the battle is not yet over. The aftermath of Sobieski's charge was not merely a military victory, but a civilizational turning point. The Ottomans retreated in disarray, leaving behind tents, weapons, and immense wealth. The spoils of their abandoned camp astonished the victors' silks, gold, exotic foods, even the first bags of coffee many Europeans had ever seen. Vienna, which had stood on the brink of annihilation, now became the symbol of resilience and divine deliverance. Sobieski entered the city not as a conqueror, but as a savior, greeted by cheers and tears from a grateful people. But the significance of Vienna stretched far beyond its walls. As historian Noel Malcolm observes in Useful Enemies, Islam and the Ottoman Empire in Western political thought, the victory at Vienna marked the beginning of a long Ottoman retreat. Though the empire would endure for centuries more, its aura of unstoppable conquest was broken. Europe, on the other hand, gained not only time but confidence. The Habsburgs would go on the offensive, slowly pushing the Ottomans back through Hungary and the Balkans. The tide of history had turned. Sobieski himself became a legend. To his contemporaries, he was likened to a modern-day Constantine or Charlemagne, a Christian monarch who had answered the call of faith and duty. His letter to Pope Innocent She, with its famous line, encapsulated his humility and his belief that the victory belonged not to him, but to God. Yet, as historian Richard Cavendish remarks in History Today, it is impossible to deny the decisive role Sobieski himself played. Without his leadership, his courage, and his charge, Vienna would have fallen, and the story of Europe would have been written in very different ink. And here lies the ultimate power of the Battle of Vienna. It was more than a clash of armies. It was a battle for the soul of a continent. The courage of one king, the faith of a people, and the thunder of hooves preserved a Europe that would go on to shape the modern world. From the Enlightenment to the revolutions of the 18th century, from the rise of nation-states to the birth of democracies, the survival of Vienna allowed Europe the chance to flourish. When we look back at September 12, 1683, we see not just a battle won, but a destiny secured. The King of Poland, John III Sobieski, stood as the shield of Christendom, and in that moment, he did not simply save Vienna, he saved Europe itself. His victory at Vienna reminds us of the power of courage, faith, and unity against overwhelming odds. And as long as history is told, the thunder of the Hussars will never fade, echoing across time as the sound of a continent preserved. Because history is not only about what happened, it is about what could have happened, had men like Sobieski not risen to the occasion. And in the shadows of Vienna's walls, in the silence after the charge, Europe was given a future,